As we continue our series on strengths here at Magic in the Room, we want to share some practical ways to discover your strengths and those of your team. Today, we're replaying episode 98, which is called At Our Best. In this episode, Luke, Chris, and Hannah demonstrate one of our favorite tools for learning your own and each other's strengths. And it's super simple. It's something that you can do on your own, with your team, with your family, as you learn about the people around you and their strengths. So don't forget to subscribe at magicintheroom.com to download the reflection guide that goes with this episode, and enjoy this week's show.
Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I am Luke Freeman.
I'm Hannah Broderud.
And I'm Chris Province. And thank you guys for being here. I look forward to what we're doing today. We're going to workshop something.
Yeah.
Do like a little live workshop. Right?
Yeah,
and so
let's do it.
I think what we'll call this At Our Best, right?
Okay.
So we work with some kind of, I don't know, they're kind of like icebreaker cards, right? And they're called At Your Best cards, and they have different attributes listed on them. And I think I just wanted to take some time today and work through a few of these. And ideally, these attributes really make us better version of ourselves, right? So we've all drawn a particular attribute off the deck here, and we're going to talk about maybe how that shows up for us, maybe get into a little bit of science behind the attribute itself and how it affects the productivity of leaders or teams, and just have a little fun, have a little bit of a conversation, and learn a little bit more about one another. And kind of coming along with us is everybody that listens, right? And maybe they can think about how these attributes apply to their own life and have a role in their effectiveness as we move through. So,
And I think the other piece of this is like modeling. You can do this with your team.
Sure.
This is a great activity that, like, spend 10 minutes of a staff meeting. And it doesn't have to be, we'll probably talk for 30, 40 minutes, the three of us. It's not that big a commitment. You can introduce it one week and then say, hey, next week, Chris, I want you to bring a card, or I want you to bring a word. And we're going to talk about it for 5 or 10 minutes as a team. So I just want to frame it up that way so that you are taking away kind of practical, how would you facilitate this with a group that you were leading?
Sure. And if you guys don't mind, can I model the way?
Please
you may.
do.
Okay. So the word that I have is calm, right? And so I'm looking at, how does my effectiveness at being a leader rely on remaining calm? And what are some of the things that I can do to facilitate that state? Because in as we go through day-to-day practices, operating, life in general, like, there are emotional things that happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a pretty good stoic, but I'm not great. Like, I get fired up, right? And when I'm emotionally hijacked, it is very difficult to make good decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I show up as, like, not the best version of me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when I'm emotionally hijacked, like, I have a desire to, like, talk shit, I want to be like, well, mess on all that and F that guy. Like, I'm somehow wronged.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've been wronged. How do I make this right? And that does not make me an effective leader. And it's about that mindfulness to say, okay, how do I intervene? How do I find a better place? And maybe it's an oh shit moment. It's like, man, this is really bad.
Mm-hmm.
This is, like, not kind of bad. This is really bad. And it's going to have disastrous outcomes. And now my heart starts beating fast. My temperature rises to about 101. And I'm like, this is bad, right? And I get locked up. I can't think about what I'm supposed to do next. I've got to find a way out. And the best way I know to get out of that problem and show up as the best version of me, the person that's only there to help other people achieve their vision of success, is I have to accept whatever the worst case scenario is. I have to accept it.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to evaluate my role in whatever this situation is. What decisions did I make? What actions did I take that landed me here? So I have to bring in personal responsibility. Okay. And I have to accept whatever the worst case scenario might be. And that's what returns me to that non-negotiable stakeholder and that non-negotiable purpose. Like, anchoring back to why I'm here creates this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I find calm. I mean, I think topically someone says, well, calmness is sitting on a beach. Well, yeah, but that doesn't help me when I've just been told, like, you know, here's these findings, or here's this outcome, and it's harmful in some way to a business or to a person.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Well, and there's what you're talking about is how do we remain calm in the middle of a crisis or some sort of event that can be triggering, that can be, that can cause that emotional hijack, right? So how do we remain calm under fire as leaders? How do we lead with intention and purpose, remaining calm so that we don't contribute to escalating the situation? And if you think about what happens in the brain, you talk about being hijacked, right? And there's the term, the amygdala hijack, when our feeling brain we just get flooded with emotion, right? And the limbic system in the brain, which is the middle brain and it's an older part of the brain, right? It's part of the animal brain. That's the part of the brain that makes subconscious assessment about threat or reward. And so when we're hijacked in that way, it's because our limbic system is activated. Our threat detection is up, right? And it flags our defensive mechanisms.
is that why I get hot and my heart beats fast?
Yes, that is exactly
and I
why.
can't think straight.
Right? And so the brain can only do one thing effectively at a time, right? So either we feel strongly or we think clearly. So the newer part of the brain, and humans have the largest prefrontal cortex of all the animals because we have a much more developed frontal lobe. And that's the thinking brain, right? The prefrontal cortex. So one of the things that we can use to regulate emotion and create more calm is to ask a question, whether that's asking a question of someone else who's in that state when we're leader, or we can ask a question of ourselves. Because what it does, it flips the activity and the blood flow in the brain from the limbic system and the emotional, the amygdala regulates the emotional intensity in the brain.
Nice.
And it flips the activity into the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of the brain. And studies have shown when we're operating actively in the thinking brain, the emotional intensity subsides. And on the flip side, when the emotional reactivity is really high, there's reduced blood flow and reduced activity in the thinking part of the brain.
That's powerful. So if I find myself in this state of like, man, I'm feeling strongly, so I'm probably not thinking clearly. If I can then go to someone that I'm connected with and ask a question, that is kind of maybe a kickoff to de-escalation.
I would frame it a little bit differently. If you have someone there that asks you a question, it will flip that, right?
Okay.
And if you don't, you can do that for yourself. So I would say we've talked about the importance of curiosity, and I'm going to talk about my attribute here in a little bit, but getting curious, so leading with curiosity, asking yourself the question, why am I feeling so strongly about this? Where is this emotion coming from? Why is this so intense right now? And it helps you actually start thinking about what you're feeling, which automatically reduces the intensity of the emotion. So that's self-coaching.
Right.
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind for me is that having a process helps in crisis, and practicing that process helps. And for me, I've spent, how many days in wilderness medicine training? A lot. Let's just say 40 or 50 days worth of training. To me, it feels like a lot. Lots of different courses over a period of a decade. Established curriculum for what do you do if somebody gets hurt and you're far away from medical care. And so I feel, even though a lot of that training has lapsed and I can't say I'm certified, the habit and the pathways in my brain whenever something goes wrong, I think continue to be affected. Because in the same way that we say we have a process if there's a first aid incident, right? First, is the scene safe? Is anyone else at risk? Am I, as the helper, at risk? Okay, no, it's safe, great. Does someone have a clear airway? Are they breathing? Do they have a pulse? Are they bleeding out somewhere? Is there some sort of spinal or head trauma that I need to be aware of? Those are all in order things that you would know to check. So having those very top of mind, if something goes awry, if there's a wreck on the side of the road and you pull over to help, knowing those things creates, I've never thought of it this way or understood it the way that Hannah explains it, but it does move you from a space of fear into the cognitive process, right? So, okay, now it's not I'm scared, it's I'm working a process. And I'll say when crisis arises that isn't of the physical sort, when it is look, here are these findings, I find myself using a similar process. Okay, is there any immediate danger to our operation? Is there something that's going to happen in the next hour that's critical, that could hurt someone, one of our stakeholders, one of our team members? Okay, no. All right, now let's look at the functions and the processes that keep us alive as an organization. Our revenue, our relationship with our customers, our relationship with our team members, our technology operating systems, all of these things that are central to how we actually get things done every day. Is anything threatening any of those core systems? Okay, no. All right, well, this is something that we're really, when do we need a decision, or when are the potential consequences? Okay, it's 6 weeks away. Great. All right. How do I now start planning for my answer 6 weeks from now? What do I need to learn? Who do I need to bring along? Or maybe it's someone who's really upset and they say that they're going to quit today. Okay, great. Let me go through my checklist. Okay, I think we're okay, right? For the most part, we're fine. But how do we mitigate this? Well, first, we talk to the person. Great. Let's find out if there actually is a risk. If there is, and they're done, right? They're leaving. Okay. Well, what's the immediate operational outcome of that? And how do we need, so you kind of get into this area where you're depending on those systemic process steps and not on how you feel about those steps. So, if you haven't practiced that, right, I have the privilege that I have a little bit of that drilled into me. If you don't, I think maybe even writing it down and being able to reference it.
Yeah. And another thing that comes to mind as you're talking, so in some way we're creating a little bit of detachment in the situation, right? By responding with process and activating cognition and the thinking part of the brain. I think it's important too to recognize that when we've gone through a crisis kind of event, and I'm someone who tends to be very calm in those situations, but I may have a reaction later, right? Because the situation requires of me that I'm calm, and that's the part of me that I lead with in that situation, because it is what I sense that others around me need in order to move through this event and this crisis. But I may have an emotional reaction or response later. I may feel exhausted and fatigued later. I may have some recovery to do. And so I think that's part of it too, as we consider the leader's journey and responsibility, is to acknowledging the cost. There's always a cost to every situation. And just having awareness of that, right? That's not right or wrong. It's just sometimes even when we remain calm, we handle the situation really well, recognizing that it, just like if you just did a race or you just did some kind of athletic feat, right? And you won and you did really well, you still have some recovery to do afterwards. So being just cognizant of that.
Yeah. And I would kind of wrap all this up with, I think Stoicism has helped deal with a lot of this, like understanding that it is about response. Like when we receive that emotional stimulus, like a leader always has the response within their control. So, like resource, like the obstacle is the way. Ryan Holiday is a guy that speaks, at length about Stoicism and how leaders can invoke that to be more effective.
And his second book is actually still, or he has many books, but follow up to that one is Stillness is the Way, or something about stillness, which talks to calm, right?
One other thing about calm is that just like we can't expect to show up to a marathon without any training and then run a race, we also can't expect to have big emotions and manage them well if we haven't been practicing mindfulness of our emotional state in the small things. And so something like a mindfulness meditation practice where we can identify our emotions, observe them, sit with them, feel compassion for ourselves, feeling that, experiencing it, and then be able to clear those and move on. If we practice that in a small way, daily, weekly, right, then we're much more equipped for the big thing, right? And being able to have a mindfulness practice that can put its arms all the way around really big feelings and walk through those.
Right. So, I think just, again, like some level of rigor in understanding that discipline can increase our effectiveness as leaders. So thank you guys for helping me kind of explore this idea, this particular attribute as it relates to my effectiveness. And so let's roll on.
So my attribute that I wanted to talk about, and these cards are cool because they have the attribute, they have a word on one side and they have a picture on the other. And so on the back of my card is a picture of a baby with some rubber duckies, and the baby is like putting its mouth on the side of the bathtub. And so that is kind of the definition of this attribute of being curious. Because babies are new, they're exploring everything. They're curious about everything. They want to touch it, taste it, eat it, and just interacting with the world in a very physical way, right? That's a way of exploring. So I think of curiosity as one of the most important leadership attributes. It's one of the most important attributes for a good coach, for a good teacher, for a good student, for a good parent. Curiosity is what helps us discover the world and learn the world. So even to tie that into the previous conversation about how to remain calm, right? If we lead with curiosity rather than reactivity, my good friend Karen Lum, who we will surely have on the podcast someday, talks about getting fascinated rather than frustrated. And the fascination has this element of curiosity to it, right? So when we encounter a situation we don't understand, that we're appalled by, that is just overwhelming, or whatever it is, when we feel like we're getting triggered and beginning to get hijacked, what if we got curious? What if we asked questions of the people in our organization rather than reacting to assumptions? What if we asked questions of ourselves and about our own assumptions to gain more awareness? So curiosity to me is a really important attribute that I feel when I lead with curiosity, I am at my best. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree. Like, you cannot cultivate that growth mindset without some level of curiosity. And, we talk about roles. Like, I'm curious about, I like being a person that runs. Like, am I a runner?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Am I willing to commit to being that?
Mm-hmm.
I like to fish. Can I be a fisherman?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So this idea of exploration, the things that, these roles that make life so rich, they all start with curiosity. And then, when I think about growth mindset, I think about, like, when we pick up this deck of cards, that's evidence of growth mindset, the fact that we want to explore this thing. When we come into this room to have these conversations, it's evidence, like, we're curious about things. When I pick up a book, I'm signaling that I'm curious about things. When I show up at a conference, I'm curious about things. When I read the article, I'm curious about things. So it's like curiosity shows up in how I engage with life.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about attributes, like at our best
Mm-hmm.
sort of attributes, curiosity is a huge part.
Yeah.
I think for every leader, but it shows up in very big ways, and it shows up in small ways that can land us in some pretty big places.
Mm-hmm.
Similar thread, but the thing that struck me when you shared about curiosity is that, the foundation of curiosity is humility. And only when I'm humble and admit that I don't know everything can I really be curious about, well, what is it that I don't know that I could learn?
Mm-hmm.
We have a little bit of a saying kind of just on our team, like, oh yeah, I met a new guy with this new client, and yep, he's the guy. He's the guy. He has all the answers. He knows everything, right? Hannah and I were on a call the other day with someone who's the guy.
Yeah.
Right. And every time we said, we have a little bit of expertise. Like, have we thought about it this way? Oh yeah. Yeah. But
that's how we do things around here.
Yeah. Always sure, always with an answer, not curious. And I'm not trying to, he's, I don't know. I don't know why I'm trying to not say something bad about someone, but I think this idea of humility is really central to curiosity, and why it's leaders at their best, or why are leaders at their best when they're curious? I think we're in a world that demands curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not curious, we're going to be left behind.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be hard for the folks who aren't curious, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's hard days ahead.
Can you imagine the extinction burst we're going to get from from the fixed mindset, I don't want to learn, I don't want to move? And I think we're seeing that a little bit already.
Yeah.
Right. So let's not fall victim to that.
Mm-hmm.
Define extinction burst for everyone.
Yeah, it's just like these behaviors that have always served me, that now that they no longer serve me, I'm going to act out. And I'm going to try to blow up everything that's moving that I can't control in order to protect my own position in the world. And there's so much, especially around social dialogue, like the end of the book is written. Like the market has already decided the stance on the things, and we have subcategories of people that are just standing staunchly against the way the market wants to move or the way society wants to move. And it's an exercise in futility.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is move at the speed of the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a leader that anchors to what you know today or what I know today, and I'm never going to move, I'm not going to learn anything else, and I refuse to accept the changes that other people thrust upon me, then that's at my own decline. Like, my performance will decline if that's the stance I want to take.
Well, and that's, yeah, in a rapidly changing world, right? The learners are who will move, the people who move with the speed of the challenge, who lead with curiosity, who are open to discovering what is happening, what is changing, what do I need to learn, how can I adapt? Because the learned will find themselves beautifully equipped to handle a world that no longer exists. And that's something we've talked about in recent episodes of, if we as organizations are not willing to change our business model, to change our hiring practices, to adapt to a changing marketplace, to human evolution, to changes of, global changes and changes in the market, we're going to be left behind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the idea of curiosity is how I become. Like, being not curious is how I be. And things that be are subject to entropy, right? They're the things that fall apart.
Yeah.
I'm going to layer on a little bit of a meta narrative. I mean, there was a time not too long ago when the way people interacted with their world, the news that they got about their world, was like a newspaper, maybe once a week, maybe daily. And it'd have a couple pages of global news and a couple pages of local news and a couple pages about sports and a couple pages about business. And that was it. And, you might have one section that you would flip to and read first, but you'd probably see some other headlines and get curious. And most people were more of a generalist in what they understood about the world around them. Sure, if you're passionate about one subject, the thing that you do, you probably have an encyclopedia and can be an expert. I'm not saying there weren't experts in items, but most of the population had a general understanding of what was happening. Well, a couple stages of evolution, like cable news, right? Well, now I can go only consume ESPN and not consume any news, or I can go only consume one news source and not consume any sports or any lifestyle or any whatever. Next evolution, like the internet, right? There's more content than I could ever consume about a niche topic. So if you're interested in something, that can be the only thing you ever learn about. So what I'm saying is that we're finding ourselves, I think, in this place where we have people who only watch one channel and only get, their 5 places that they get information on the internet. And they're also an expert in one thing in a large organization. And I don't know how sustainable that is. I think we're seeing that reach its limits in the utility of being so niched as human beings. And the people who are curious about what's happening on a different channel, or what's happening in a different corner of the internet, or what's happening in a different function of their business, have an advantage. When most of the population becomes niched, the generalists get the advantage. When everyone's a generalist, I think a niche person probably has an advantage, right? There's a whole story. I'm going to totally nerd out here, but there are left-handed and right-handed animals as well as people.
What?
Yeah. In every population.
Only someone that's left-handed knows that.
I know.
I'm left-handed and I didn't know that. I learned something.
But in
new
every
today.
population that competes physically, so whether it's animals, humans, whatever, you'll find that the minority-handedness, however you translate it to a species, is about 10% of the population. Because that's the optimized specialistness where it becomes an advantage. So if it was 50-50, and let's say we're gladiators in the Roman Empire, and half the people are right-handed and half the people are left-handed, and you're a gladiator, well, you know how to fight right-handed people and left-handed people, right? If it was 50-50 in baseball, a pitcher would be equally good at pitching to right-handed and left-handed hitters. But when it becomes about 10%, it's niche enough that the majority of the people you're competing against have a disadvantage against that minority way of competing.
So, Luke, how then do you explain that within the human species, the higher up in levels of education you get, the higher the percentage of left-handed people are there?
Oh man, well we could go.
That's a long answer.
Yeah, we could go into all of the, like, as foxes were domesticated, they also started getting spots. And so there's a correlation between whatever the domestication pieces of the brain and genetics are and spots. Even though spots don't really have anything to do with domestication, the behaviors that you're selecting for actually also produce spots because there's some sort of genetic physiological tie-in. So could you make the same argument that something about being left-handed also leads to higher levels of performance? I'm not going to make that argument because you'll
leave that for other people.
I'll leave you to make
roll.
To jump to your own conclusion.
I roll.
Chris. I mean, Chris, to be fair, if you follow this logic, as the minority right-hander at this table have the advantage.
Yeah.
So you should just be happy about that.
I'm not left-handed, but I hang out with people who are.
Hey,
right?
that
and
says
I think
something about you.
Pretty true. That whole idea of I definitely I love surrounding myself with people that are a lot smarter than me so I can be better. And it just so happens a lot of those people are left-handed. So
okay, so to circle back to curiosity.
Yeah.
This was really a long rabbit trail here, but
you brought up the left-handedness. Bragger. Humble brag.
This idea that being a generalist in this niche society, which being a journalist requires curiosity, right? Because you're always adding to your knowledge base, is an advantage. I think for leaders that holds true.
Right.
If you're a functional leader and you understand all the other functions in your organization and kind of you understand the entire business model and what it takes to succeed in all those other functions, even though you're really an expert just in yours, you have an advantage in your team's performance when you understand all those other pieces. And a functional leader that only understands their function is disadvantaged. They have a lower ceiling with where they're going to go with their career and just the performance that they can lead their team to. So that's my point about curiosity, is it's valuable.
Yeah.
I guess I could have just said that.
No, that's awesome. I'm got my mind spinning. Everybody else out there is just still Googling if animals are really left-handed. And I'm just thinking, man, what is that break between, that law of diffusion of innovation and then that where the niche becomes an advantage? At what point does whatever attribute become an advantage? So there's something that happens between 10% and 20% adoption where these things cross over. And so that's a conversation over beers another day, but
yeah,
pretty wild.
Yeah. I mean, because being the minority handedness also has liabilities that come with it. Mm-hmm. Right. So the question is, where does the fighting advantage overcome the liabilities? Well, it's at about that 10%. Mm-hmm. So if it's 20%, you don't have enough of an advantage to overcome the liabilities that come with being in that minority group.
Yeah. And we know mass adoption tips at 18.
Yeah.
So
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
All right. Luke,
what's your attribute?
Okay. So I picked one that I feel like I struggle with, and it is decisive. It's ironic because there's some scenarios where I feel effective in my decisiveness. We kind of talked about emergency situations earlier. Mm-hmm. When one of my kids gets hurt, I feel really decisive. Mm-hmm. I feel calm. I feel like I know the right thing to do, and we can kind of walk through it and make the right choice. Do we go to the emergency room? Do we not? It's measured and decisive and effective. And the same thing happens in crisis management organizationally. I feel pretty decisive. Do I do everything right? No. Sometimes I overreact to a crisis scenario. Sometimes I underreact, but it's usually not because of a lack of decisiveness or anything like that. You know, when I think about the crises I've been in, I think usually the errors I've made have been, errors because of the situation, fair errors, not errors in decisiveness. But crises don't happen all that often. A lot of life is just, okay, what's the right way to use this next hour? Mm-hmm. Or, we have option A, we could go to this conference and speak, or we could go to option B conference and speak. And when I get into those situations, my overthinkingness, which should be very apparent after our curiosity conversation, I think oftentimes gets in my way, and I can start spinning over what's the right thing to do. And I can spin for like weeks without being decisive.
I know.
You're not going to disagree with that?
No,
so
yeah.
I'm curious. I would love to hear from both of you. Like, I would love just like tips and tricks. How do you find decisiveness? How do you get yourself out of those spinning spaces? And yeah, how does decisiveness correlate to effectiveness as a leader?
Yeah, part of it has to do with being able to prioritize effectively. And part of that also is influenced by dopamine in our brains. So dopamine regulation has something to do with both motivation, our ability to act, and our ability to make decisions and act on them. And so I think we all can think of situations in which we tend to be more decisive and in situations in which we tend to be less decisive. And getting things done, defaulting to action, it all requires a decision. But decision making is energy costly for the brain. So when you're in a crisis situation like you described, we're in a heightened state of focus because our brain is rallying all of its resources. We have extra blood flow to the brain. We have all the chemicals pumping through our system that makes us act. It's a fight or flight. It's a threat response, right? And we can choose, we've talked about this before, but we can choose different threat responses. But part of that is decisiveness. When we don't have the same level of energy or blood flow to the brain, when we don't have the same level of dopamine or cortisol or all the different hormones or chemicals that influence our ability to act, that's when we become indecisive. And people are wired differently, right? For some people, making decisions, daily small decisions about routine tasks and getting the mundane things done is easy for them. For other people, making big decisions, getting, things that we're very interested in, things that are new and novel, things that are big and scary, we get more dopamine for those and we can more easily make decisions. And so I think just understanding some brain chemistry can be helpful, right? Because I do believe that as a leader, it is important to be able to make decisions, but all of us are better at making some decisions than others.
Man, that is super helpful to me. And I'm going to be processing this for a while.
Yeah.
Just this idea that there's a brain chemistry explanation that like I do well in higher pressure, rise to the moment situations. I know that. I've known that for a long time, that's when I'm at my best. And to be able to say, there's probably a brain chemistry need for that level of activation there. Not that it's an excuse, but to then be able to manage intentionally, I don't have enough dopamine because I'm just spinning out here
Yeah.
and not able to make a decision. How do I help myself really think through the stakes a little differently? You know, I'm just kind of playing around with that kind of in real time right now. Maybe it's really thinking, what happens if I put this off too long, and creating a little bit more pressure on myself to get to a decisive spot. So, wow. Thank you, Hannah.
Yeah. And then the other thing to be aware of is that decision-making power, like any other energy, is a finite but renewable resource. So it's like a battery, right?
So you can get decision fatigue.
You can get decision fatigue. You can get fatigue, which inhibits your ability to make decisions. And so earlier in the day, so also thinking through like the flow of the day, when am I at my best for certain tasks, right? Making decisions, most people tend to do better in the morning and the first part of the day. The later it gets in the day, the more fatigue we have, the more we've worn out that muscle or the fuel that we need to be able to make decisions, which is why we all know we make terrible decisions late at night, why we default to our worst habits late at night, why we can't seem to have self-control in the evenings when we're tired. And it's the same thing with being able to make decisions. So when we have to make critical decisions, we should try to time those for the first part of the day when we have more of those resources available to us.
Yeah, that's interesting. So just real time. I mean, yesterday was a long day for me. I was on a meeting at 7 a.m. driving to the office, and I don't know, when did I get home? 8:39, in the evening after a pretty full day. We recorded 3 episodes here. We're planning our team coming in. We had all this crazy weather and flights were being canceled. There was a lot of decision making, and I got home and I knew I had some tasks to do that the team was depending on me for. I mean, scheduling our afternoon today. We have several kind of strategic planning sessions, pulling some slides together. I created an online whiteboard to help walk through some things. And those were all things that I knew needed to happen, but I was like just done. And so I intentionally sleep now, wake up earlier. So I set my alarm for 5 a.m. and I got up, and there's a reason you guys got, calendar invites at whatever it was, 5:30, 5:45 this morning, instead of 9:30, 10 o'clock last night. Cause my decision-making strength was worn out. Yeah.
But Luke, and I'm using this as an example. Well, I really expected those calendar invites last night, at 9:30. That was my understanding. That's when I was expecting to get them. You see some leaders take that approach, right?
Yeah.
Being idealistic. I wasn't checking my email at 9:30. Whether I got them at 9:30 last night or 5 o'clock this morning is immaterial. But like getting stuck in ideology is also what slows down or constricts decision-making ability or the making of quality decisions.
Yeah.
One of the things that there's this idea that is this decision strategically optimal versus does this decision create strategic optionality? And if we embrace the idea of developing strategic optionality, it speeds up the decision-making process. Because I'm not holding on to the ideal that it has to be optimized. If I am idealistic about every decision being strategically optimized, it constricts my ability to make them. And that's just a personal position that I see or have experienced. So I think one of the things is focusing on
from me.
Yeah, and other leaders.
You're being nice enough not to say it, but
well,
I'll own.
I think there's
being slowed down by idealism.
Well, and here's the thing: it's like there's a few years between me and you, right? And I think the younger a leader is, the more apt they are to focus on strategic optimization. And typically, and I'm saying I'm calling this out as a generational difference. The older generations or generations prior to tend to lean more towards optionality. And so I'm not speaking to right, wrong, any of that. I'm speaking to what is that process being decisive. When we look to optionality, we can move faster than when we look to optimized. So, and then just like, I think what else do we know about decision making? Think long, think wrong. But then that's juxtaposed with, we are always battling like the physiology of it, like what you guys already talked about. And what we know about decision making is the big things, the things that matter most, like that. It's the things that don't matter most where we get locked up. And so there's this call out to say, it's actually the smaller decisions we should spend more time about. We should spend more time thinking about, because they don't matter as much. There's not as much pressure on them.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's also kind of like, if I was to share, like, dude, like, I don't see any issue with your decisiveness on the things that matter.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's always the things that are like down channel.
Yeah.
Like conference A or conference B. At the end of the day, we're going to be both places,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, we're going to have a presence both places. We're going to continue to extend our reach. Like, yes, like figuring that out is going to take a while.
Mm-hmm.
But the decision about how we grow a brand is already made. Like the big stuff is already, like those decisions already made. It's those down channel decisions about the things that aren't as material, but tend to take longer, and that's okay.
Yeah, this is interesting because I'm going to overlay it onto like strengths-based coaching and strengths-based leadership. Because if I was going to coach myself on this, my top strength, if you look at the Gallup Strengths Finder, is strategic. And, that's my superpower in a lot of ways. But when idealism creeps into it, if I was going to coach myself, it becomes colored, right? It becomes moved off of where it is most effective. And so, like, I think about this decisiveness piece. My takeaway is when I'm feeling indecisive, I've probably handicapped my strength either by leaning too much into it, or I've taken an idealistic strategy approach instead of a pragmatic or optionality focused strategic approach. So for all of us as we grow, just the fact that something shows up as our superpower or our strength doesn't mean that it can't be developed.
Mm-hmm.
So actually where I can have the biggest impact in my life, fulfilling my personal purpose, is taking, for me, strategy or strategic nature, strategic focus, and developing that so it truly can be like 1% strength, like 1% best in the world strength. And I can only do that through conversations like this. Mm-hmm. So, that's my takeaway, and my encouragement to other people too, is that if we focus on our strengths, right, we should have higher outcome than focusing on our weaknesses. So,
yeah. I just wanted a couple of things to throw in is like, we're playing a game with no end. Like, it's an infinite game.
Mm-hmm.
So this whole idea of like wrong and right, like that stuff left town. Like, as soon as I started developing as a leader, I think that was the first thing I let go of. That, like, there's no wrong decision. As long as nobody gets harmed, like physically harmed, emotionally harmed, like, there's no wrong decision. We can always return to previous state. We can unwind, right? We can, we have a lot of conversations with people as they move through career paths. Like, should I move halfway across the country and take that job? Well, what do you know? You live in Tulsa and you're a general manager, you're going to be a VP or a director, or, halfway across the country. Like, you can always come back here and be a GM. Like, it's where you are today. Like, it's your launch point. Like, and that's, I do consider a lot of things about decisions like, well, what is your current launch point? How does this next decision influence your launch point? If you have does it potentially improve where you launch into the next thing from, because you've already established your current launch point.
Yeah, you're describing life as a choose your own adventure book.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I would like read the choose your own adventure book and like, all right, do you go into the cave or do you cross the river? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go into the cave. You go into the cave. Oh, there's a bear in the cave. You're eaten. End of story. I'm like, okay, I'll flip back to page 17.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to go cross the river.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, you cross the river. There's a deer that lets you ride it, to victory. Awesome.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's a helpful way to think about. We can always flip back to page 17
Right.
Yeah.
and choose something else.
Yeah.
And that's not the way most people approach life.
Yeah. And that's where, when you first asked the question, like that is 100% my approach. Like I'm not saying that decisions aren't important, but as long as they're aligned, we can always go back to page 17.
Yeah. And I think remaining curious is the key to doing that, right? When we recognize that things don't have to be set in stone. Now, if we're someone who derives a lot of sense of security and safety from things being set in stone and being the same and unchanging and unmoving, that's going to be tougher to overcome, right? To recognize that I made this decision and it had this outcome. I've learned something now that allows me to get curious and consider whether there is another decision that is also possible that could lead in a different direction.
Yeah. And as long as that's, tying this together, like the decisions I make, like everything that happens to me is some sort of outcome from a decision I have made or a situation I have placed myself within, typically. Okay. 99% of my existence is within my control. And 100% of my response is within my control. But after making a decision, if I find myself in an outcome or a situation that is uncomfortable or I don't like or is creating suffering, I can't flip out. I can't get emotionally hijacked. I have to say, how do I get curious about this?
Yeah.
What's my responsibility? What have I done to land myself here? And then what do I do to remedy this? Do I turn back to page 17 and start over? Or do I go into a new area or a new season from where I am? And it's that constant monitoring and evaluation around, like, really enjoyed how these attributes connect together at the end of the day, even though they were selected separately. Just a really rich conversation. So Luke, like, why don't you take us out of here today? Like, as you exit this space, how do you put all these things together?
So I'm going to go back to application. So a couple practical things. I hope if you're listening, like this all came out of just drawing 3 cards out of a deck. And you saw that kind of we started with a structured thing. Hey, what does decisiveness have to do with leadership? What does curiosity have to do with leadership? And we ended up in these really interesting places where I know I grew personally. And I think if we create the space to have meaningful conversation, that good things happen. People want to grow. People want to develop. If we model the way with vulnerability and curiosity, we allow people to have conversations like this. And so just try something. Just start it. That really practically. My other practical takeaway is, at my best, cards should sponsor us because we just did like an hour-long advertisement for them. So if you're listening, I mean, give us a call or just send us a check.
Neil would be the most likely to know them since they're out of the UK. So Neil, if you're listening,
all right,
holler at your neighbor.
We'll see Neil next week.
Yeah,
we'll have to have a conversation.
Knows each other.
Yeah. UK, right?
All right, everyone.
Yeah.
Remain calm,
Yeah.
stay curious, and make good decisions.
Yeah, that's right. Those are our attributes. That's how we get to be at our best. So thank you guys so much for the engaging conversation and some development for me and hopefully for everyone around the table and everyone listening. So thank you guys. Thank everyone that's listening to Magic in the Room. And until next time, let's go win the day.
Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Bratteroo and Luke Freeman, and produced by Ben West. Theme music is by Evan Grimm. Title track Fake Love available on Apple Music. And this podcast was recorded at Storycatcher Studio with video and audio editing and production support by Brad O'Hara and Alicia Crum, with inspiration, strategy and technical support by yours truly, Neil Hughes. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and remember, previous episodes are available at magicintheroom.com.